You think your family tree has a few strange branches? A difficult uncle, a cousin no one talks about. But what if a legal document, a marriage certificate, proved your family tree was a wreath? What if a woman, with a license stamped and approved by the government, married her own grandfather? This isn't a myth from a distant land. This isn't a Dark Age fable. This is America. This is Virginia, in the bright modern 20th century. The year is 1909, the age of steamships, the first Ford Model T cars, and a true story the country did everything it could to bury. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the archives of the Library of Congress, Virginia's own legislative records, and local newspaper accounts from the period. Now back to the story. The story begins on a small farm, 47 acres of Virginia clay near a tiny, unincorporated village named Whale. Today, it's swallowed by the wealthy suburbs of Washington, D.C., but in 1909, it was the middle of nowhere. A place of dirt roads, deep woods, and quiet lives where secrets were hard to keep. On this farm lived 3 people. The patriarch was Frederick G.F.H. Griffith, a 59-year-old man with a thick gray mustache and the hard hands of a farmer. Living with him was his daughter, Sarah Ambrose, a widow. And with Sarah lived her daughter, Eleanor Ambrose. Eleanor was 17 years old. She was Frederick's granddaughter. Their life was one of isolation. Frederick owned the land. He controlled the money. Sarah and Eleanor were dependent on him for every meal, for the roof over their heads. Neighbors would later say the family kept to themselves, that there was something peculiar about the old man and his granddaughter. They were seen together constantly, not like a grandfather and a child, but like a couple. The whispers started long before the marriage license. In the small world of rural Fairfax, people saw, they talked, but no one did anything. Because what could they do? It was just a feeling. It wasn't a crime. Not yet. On the morning of September 28th, 1909, Frederick Griffith and Eleanor Ambrose hitched up a horse and buggy. They told Sarah they were going into town. They didn't go into town. They rode to the nearest train station and bought 2 tickets to Washington, D.C. They crossed the Potomac River, leaving Virginia and its laws behind them. In 1909, Washington was a haven for couples in a hurry. It had no waiting period, no residency requirements. It was a place you went to get things done quickly and quietly. It was a marriage mill. They made their way to the Marriage License Bureau, a small, stuffy office filled with clerks and rubber stamps. When the clerk asked for their details, the lies began. Frederick Griffith, age 59, said he was 45. Eleanor Ambrose, age 17, said she was 21, the legal age of consent. The clerk asked the most important question, "Are you related by blood?" They both looked him in the eye and said no. The clerk, seeing dozens of couples a day, had no reason to doubt them. He took their fee. He pushed a form across the counter. It was marriage license number 89,393. All they needed now was a minister. They found one easily. His name was W.H.L. Marshall. He ran a small chapel, performing quick ceremonies for a small fee. He asked no questions. He just read the words from the book. And in a matter of minutes, Frederick Griffith and his granddaughter Eleanor were pronounced husband and wife. She was now, in the eyes of the law, her own step-grandmother. They took the train back to Virginia that same afternoon. They went back to the 47-acre farm. They went back to the house they shared with Eleanor's mother, Frederick's daughter, and they began their life as a married couple. For 5 weeks, the secret held. 5 weeks, 35 days. Inside that farmhouse, Sarah Ambrose was now living with her father and her daughter, who were also husband and wife. The exact horror of that arrangement is lost to history. But outside the house, the whispers that had been quiet before now grew into a roar. A neighbor, whose name is recorded only as a prominent citizen, finally had enough. He went to the offices of the local newspaper, the Fairfax Herald. He told the editor the story. The editor, smelling the biggest story of his career, sent a reporter out to the Griffith farm. The reporter found Frederick working in his fields. He confronted him. At first, Griffith denied it. He called it a vicious lie. But the reporter had a copy of the marriage license from Washington. The number, the names, the date. Frederick's story crumbled. He admitted it was true. He had married his granddaughter. He tried to justify it. He told the reporter he was a lonely old man. He said he loved the girl and that Eleanor loved him. He claimed he wanted to make sure she would inherit his farm when he died, and marriage was the only way to be sure. It was a pathetic, self-serving excuse, and everyone knew it. The story ran in the Fairfax Herald on November 5th, 1909. The headline was stark. The Associated Press, the National Wire Service, picked it up immediately. The story exploded. It was a national sensation, a scandal that perfectly captured the fears and anxieties of a changing America. Headlines bloomed in newspapers from coast to coast. "Astounding marriage in Virginia," screamed a paper in Pennsylvania. "His bride is granddaughter," announced the San Francisco Call. "Aged man weds a child," wrote a New York daily. The story of the farmer from Veal was now public property, a source of national shock and outrage. The Commonwealth of Virginia, humiliated on a national stage, was forced to act. The man tasked with cleaning up the mess was the Fairfax County Commonwealth's attorney, Robert E. Lee Chichester. He was a respected local lawyer, a man of the old Virginia establishment. He was deeply offended by the case, not just as a lawyer, but as a citizen. He immediately launched an investigation. He sent the sheriff to the farm to serve a summons. He ordered Frederick Griffith and Eleanor Ambrose to appear in court. But as he prepared his case, he ran into a wall made of paper and ink. He opened the Virginia Code, the leather-bound book that contained all the laws of the state. He turned to section 2224, the chapter titled Forbidden Marriages. He read the list. It was long and detailed, a relic of Old English law. A man was forbidden from marrying his mother, his stepmother, his sister, his daughter, his granddaughter's daughter. He couldn't marry his aunt, his uncle's wife, his son's wife, his wife's daughter. The list went on and on, spelling out every conceivable forbidden relationship. Or, so the lawmakers had thought. Chichester read the list again. And again, the words were not there. A man could not marry his son's daughter. He could not marry his daughter's daughter. But the law said nothing, absolutely nothing, about a man marrying his granddaughter directly. It was a flaw in the language, an impossible, unthinkable oversight. The law, as written, did not forbid it. Frederick Griffith, for all his moral depravity, had not actually committed a crime. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the archives of the Library of Congress and Virginia's own legislative records. Now back to the story. The court date was set for December 6, 1909. The case would be heard by Judge J.B.T. Thornton in the small brick courthouse in the center of Fairfax. On that day, the town was overrun. The courtroom was packed to suffocation. Every seat was taken. People stood in the aisles. They crowded the doorway. National reporters with notepads and pencils squeezed in among the local farmers. Everyone wanted to see the man who married his granddaughter. Frederick Griffith showed up, looking pale and frightened, wearing a worn suit. He was accompanied by his lawyer. Eleanor was not there. Her mother, Sarah, had sent a letter to the court. She claimed her daughter was prostrated with grief and shame. She said Eleanor was too ill, too fragile to face the public humiliation. In her statement, Sarah painted Eleanor as a helpless victim, a simple-minded girl who had been manipulated by her powerful grandfather. She said Eleanor did not realize the enormity of the act until the newspapers published the story. Was it true? Or was it a desperate mother trying to save her daughter from a scandal that would ruin her life? We'll never know. But her absence made the trial all about one person, Frederick Griffith. Griffith's lawyer, a man named Mr. Moncure, made a simple, powerful argument. He didn't defend his client's morals. He didn't have to. He just pointed at the law book. He read section 2224 aloud to the court. He argued that the court's only job was to interpret the law as it was written, not as it ought to be. And the law as written did not forbid this marriage. His argument was cold, logical, and legally sound. He said, "The legislature has not seen fit to prohibit such a marriage, and this court cannot go beyond the statute." Then Prosecutor Chichester stood up. He knew he couldn't win on the text of the law, so he made a broader argument. He appealed to something older than the Virginia Code. He appealed to common law, to public decency, to the fundamental tenets of civilization. He argued that such a marriage was a social monstrosity, a danger to the public, or dare. He thundered that even if the specific words were missing from the statute, the marriage was so obviously wrong, so inherently void, that the judge had a duty to strike it down. He was asking the judge to make law, not just interpret it. The entire courtroom held its breath. Judge Thornton, a man who had presided over land disputes and petty thefts, now held the moral standing of his state in his hands. He took less than a day to decide. He sided with the prosecution. He declared the marriage of Frederick Griffith and Eleanor Ambrose to be null and void. He did not, however, use Chichester's common law argument. Instead, he found his own legal path. He ruled that, because the marriage was based on lies told to the D.C. clerk, lies about their ages and their relationship, it was fraudulent from the beginning. Furthermore, he declared that any marriage so subversive of the good order of society was against Virginia's public policy, and therefore could not be recognized. He annulled it. He wiped it from existence. Eleanor was free, but the second part of the ruling was just as important. Judge Thornton agreed with the defense that Griffith had not technically broken any criminal statute. The loophole was real. Therefore, he could not be prosecuted. He could not be fined. He could not be sent to jail. Frederick Griffith walked out of the Fairfax courthouse a free man. But he was also a ruined man. He was a social pariah. His name was a synonym for scandal. He couldn't stay in Virginia. Within weeks of the trial, he sold his 47-acre farm. The deed, filed in the county courthouse, shows he sold it on January 10th, 1910 for $2,350. He took the money and vanished. The historical record on Frederick Griffith goes cold. There's no evidence he ever returned to Virginia. He disappears from the census, from public life. He likely died in obscurity in some other state, under a cloud of shame. And what about Eleanor? the 17-year-old girl at the center of the storm? For a century, her story ended there. She vanished with her grandfather, a ghost in the historical record, forever defined by 5 weeks of a horrific marriage. Historians assume she lived a life of shame, hidden away from a world that would never forget what had been done to her. They assumed wrong. The scandal didn't just end with an annulment and a farm sale. The Commonwealth of Virginia was deeply embarrassed. The case had shown that its laws were a joke. Lawmakers in the state capital of Richmond knew they had to act. In the 1910 session of the General Assembly, a bill was introduced. House Bill number 162. Its purpose was simple: to amend and reenact Section 2224 of the Virginia Code. It was rushed through committee. It passed both the House of Delegates and the state Senate with overwhelming votes. On March 14, 1910, the governor signed it into law. The new law was much more precise. It closed the loophole. It added the specific words that had been missing. From that day forward, the law of Virginia explicitly stated, "A man shall not marry his granddaughter." The law remains on the books to this day, a legal scar left by one family's dark secret. That is where the story usually ends. A law changed, a loophole closed. But the real ending, the human ending, is found in a different set of documents. Not in law books, but in the quiet, patient records of the United States Census. 10 years after the scandal, in the 1920 census, a woman named Eleanor appears. Living in Washington, D.C., she is 27 years old. She is listed as married. Her husband is a man named William, a house painter. They have a young child. Her last name is no longer Ambrose. A decade later, the 1930 census shows her again. Still married to William. They have more children. They own their home. She is listed as a homemaker. She built a new life, a normal life, just a few miles away from the farm where the nightmare happened. She escaped. She survived. She buried her own history and started again. The marriage license that tried to make her a grandmother to herself was burned by the scandal it created. The law that failed to protect her was rewritten because of her. And Eleanor Ambrose, the girl who was supposed to be ruined forever, simply refused to be. She walked away from the headlines, found a quiet life, and raised a family. The final document isn't a court record. It's a census entry. A simple line of ink that proves she won. The farm was sold. The law was changed. The girl got away.